Hi, you guys. So I am here to bring you skill category 3 and 4. And the reason why it made sense to combine these two categories, you will notice on the second page when I show you why it makes sense. But this is your data and source analysis. So essentially, you have, watch this, getting fancy, square. You have the data and source analysis, which if you are looking here and here, it says analyze and interpret quantitative geographic data, representative maps, tables, charts, graphs, satellites, images, and infographics. And this one says analyze and interpret qualitative, quantitative meaning numbers, qualitative meaning more like visual information, like maps again. So maps overlaps in both of them. Images, satellite images overlap in both of them. Photographs, cartoons, and landscapes. And photographs and landscapes, they overlap quite a bit as well. So it doesn't just have to be landscape images. So this could be images of culture or like people, I should say. So that's kind of like, I think, what the difference between these two are. But ultimately, every single skill, 3A, 4A, 3B, 4B, the only thing that changes is this idea of quantitative and qualitative analysis, right? And the things that you're analyzing. Skill category 3 is going to be driven by data. Skill category 4 is going to be driven by things that are not necessarily data, although I feel like maps is kind of on the fence, provides data usually. So let's just go through and kind of talk about the examples. Not all of the examples I love. Remember that this is a collaborative effort from other teachers plus the work that I'm putting into it. So some of the examples are kind of like meh, but I will definitely be pointing those out to you as we move through. So 3A says identify the different types of data presented in maps and qualitative data. Ooh, that's probably a typo too. I'm almost positive that said quantitative data. So that's just ignore me there. And I don't want to start over. So keep in mind that this identify, this is not going to be a task verb that's used on the FRQ. So you're probably not going to see something like this in one of the FRQs. This is really just basic level 1 knowledge. So for example, you might have, this is of course a census, a little snapshot of the 2020 census. So the example is identify 3 types of demographic data that could be mapped based on results from the United States 2020 census. So you're looking for those things that are most easily mapped. The first one that stands out to me is one that has to do with race. So you have 2 questions here that have to do with race. This is, of course, Hispanic, Latin, or Spanish origin, and this is just other types of racial categories. So that's probably one of the easiest things that you can map. So that would be something that I would definitely point out. So this is another one that I think is probably pretty good, this demographic data. So you're looking at the age of the population. So you're getting some information about how young or old the population, and you should know that you're going to get 2 different types of data. Like it might be interesting actually to layer up this data just a little bit so you can actually map demographic information related to age based on each one of these races as well. So that would be another map. And you can look at sort of the gender distribution as well, which in the United States, you're probably going to see 50-50, but it's still something else that you could map. And then if you look, quite a bit of overlap, identify the different types of information presented in visual sources. For these first 3 skills, I'm just going to use our FRQ because this is a great example of a visual source. So, and the way that the FRQ is written actually uses task verbs. So identify 2 cultural traits shown in one or both of the photographs are indicative of ethnicity. I don't know why this wouldn't be on an FRQ. I'm questioning it, but I mean, everybody who's anybody is saying there's just going to be the 3 task verbs: describe, explain, compare. This one seems like it should be fair game because you can't Google it. You literally have to look at the images and say, oh, look, there's language. That's a cultural trait. The lanterns, that's a cultural trait. This big gate, that's a cultural trait. And so I don't know why they wouldn't use it, but I'm just going to go with the experts, although I do so tentatively. 3B is one that we've been practicing forever and a day right now with your 4-level analysis. So I'm not even going to say anything about this. I'm just going to read it and move on. So now you're describing the spatial patterns presented in maps and quantitative data and geospatial data. And again, when you're describing, you're just telling what you're seeing, right? You're not explaining it. You're not telling me why those patterns exist. There's no because. You're just looking at this and telling me what you see, right? So if you're talking about regional patterns of female ownership of agricultural lands, you're going to highlight in Europe, there's more female ownership of land than, say, there is in Africa or in the United States or something like that. Actually, that's kind of a compare. See, I'm not very good at this either. You're just going to be describing what you see. So in Europe, there's more land ownership. In places like sub-Saharan Africa or North Africa, I should say, there's less. There's a variety of, depending on the country, and this is where like those map quizzes come in handy. So you can talk about Chile and Brazil, not versus, and so on and so forth. You guys get the gist. 4B, describe the spatial patterns presented in visual sources. So again, you can see the overlap between these two skills. So in our FRQ this past week, describe one way in which relocation diffusion resulted in cultural landscapes shown in both photographs. That is a spatial pattern. When you're talking about something diffusing and showing up someplace else, you're talking about how that thing or where that thing is located in space. And again, describe just telling like the characteristics of. So relocation, diffusion results in the cultural landscape shown in both photographs because people from this is of course China. In San Francisco, the same is true for Liverpool. People in China move and then they change the landscape to reflect their cultural values. This is relocation diffusion because by definition, relocation diffusion means that in order for the cultural trait to diffuse, the people have to take it with them, and that's how we see this. Okay, 3C. Explain the patterns and trends in maps and in quantitative and geospatial data to draw conclusions. And now we get the explain. So now it's the because. And a lot of times as I'm kind of going through this and helping you all make sense of these task verbs, it's actually helping me make sense of how to explain it to you because I just did it there. But one thing that I'm realizing that I'm doing as I'm processing what explain means is that I'm actually describing what I see. So I might say something like, the biggest change between 2001 and 2019 is that you see evidence using this. These are aerial photographs, of course, satellite images, that you see evidence of deforestation. That's what's happening between these two images. And you can see it not just in this area of Peru. I'm not even going to try and pronounce it, but you can also see it if you look at the map in total. I mean, like even this part down here where you're seeing like this is like farmland, man. You can tell that this is like farmland. So the trees are being cut down to make room for farmland. And this is like straight out of agriculture. You guys know that part of the reason why this pattern is happening is because of commercial agricultural practices and people in Brazil cutting down the rainforest to make room for either agriculture like you see here, but this is probably more for beef production. And so essentially that's what you might say for something like this. And then explain the patterns and trends in visual sources to draw conclusions. Again, you guys had to do this. Explain how cultural landscapes shown in the photograph represent more than one culture. This is a straight sequence occupants question or prompt, like you want to talk about how you see evidence of the landscape prior, and then you can see evidence of all of this Asian influence as well right on top of the landscape, particularly in this image right here where you see these like very stereotypical like London row houses, and then you see the evidence of like obviously the Chinese gate here. Okay, something is wrong. 3 and 4D are just too stinking similar for me to differentiate between the two. So I just put this as one map, compare patterns and trends in maps, and quantitative, you could say qualitative, because remember maps fall under both categories, to draw conclusions. So this one is asking you to actually compare the maps of the British territories to draw conclusions about self-determination and independence movements as illustrated by the size of the British Empire in 1901 to 1959. So I feel like this is the one that kind of bothered me because like typically FRQ prompts are not this wordy. But I don't hate it. I don't love it. Like, you have to understand what self-determination is. You have to be aware of these independence movements. It would be really helpful if you understood the independence movements, particularly in this region of the world, happened after World War II. So you have that knowledge that you can add. But when you're comparing, first you have to describe, right? So in 1901, the British Empire extended all over the world, from Canada to India to Australia. But by 1959, the British Empire had very, very few colonies left. And part of the reason why, so this is a because again, part of the reason why was because of World War II. And after World War II, Europe couldn't really maintain its colonies. That and all those pro-nationalist independence movements where people were just tired of a colonial power controlling them. They had a desire for self-determination, which means a right to like control their own affairs. And that led to those independence movements and so on and so forth, or however you want to explain that. But like, you have to say, like, the colonial, you have to talk about both maps. So what do you notice about map one? What do you notice about map two? And then why did the change happen between these two images? And I think that that's why compare can be like, kind of challenging. So you're describing, you're explaining, you have to say something about both things that you're being asked to compare, and so on and so forth. Okay, here's another good one. So compare the number of majority Hispanic counties in 2008 and 2018. And again, like, one thing that I think is interesting in terms of like any of these conversations is always make sure that you are paying attention to scale, right? So this looks like it's state, but I mean, just based on the definition counties, right? We know that the scale might be like state. I'm not even sure I would say that this is, I don't know. I'm not even sure I would say this national, but I guess you could argue it's national. But certainly the scale of analysis is county, because that's what the map is like literally telling you. It's giving you in terms of its information. And then you do the same thing, right? So in 2000, most of the counties with the majority of Hispanic Americans were located literally right at the borders. And you could even be specific and say in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. Whereas in 2018, you see a huge influx of almost all those counties, particularly in California, but you also see movement not just along the borders, but bigger populations of Hispanic Americans in Washington and New York, and even more so in Florida, and all the way even up until Kansas. And then there's a variety of things that you could talk about. I mean, you could bring in Ravenstein's laws of migration. You can talk about why like we have such an influx of Hispanic Americans or Latinos coming up here. And you can talk about the Central American influx. You could talk about so not just Mexico. So people are coming from Central America, and they're not just coming for economic reasons anymore. They're fleeing as refugees. I mean, there's a variety of different becauses that you could include to explain why the pattern shifts, but it is something that you ought to explain. So once you're done talking about each of the maps, take it a step further and then talk about why you think those changes actually happened. Don't make it up, you guys. If you don't know, just leave it at compare, which means just describe. Because chances are, maybe you'll get a point for that. Who knows? I don't know. Do the best you can, but don't make it up. Only use information that you know to be true in your head. All right, 3E. And 4E. Okay, so explain what the data imply or illustrate about geographic principles, processes, behavior, and outcomes. So notice how this is not a describe, right? You're not describing what you're seeing on the population pyramid. You're not describing the stage of the demographic transition. Here, you're explaining how changing roles of females have affected fertility rates in Canada over time. This is almost to a certain degree like a compare. So you have to talk about Canada's shape here, right? The biggest explanation is that you see a population dip, right? So in terms of growth, so population growth rate is declining. And you know that because the bottom of these pyramid is not as wide as like the top of the pyramid. This is almost indicating, I mean, to me, this is classic stage 4. So don't make the mistake and say that this is negative. This is like zero population growth. Like, it's almost perfect, in fact, in terms of zero population growth. So changing roles of women, explain how, what would cause this? So what would make Canada's population pyramid go from this to this? Well, this could happen because more women are entering the workforce, because women are waiting longer to have children, because women are deciding not to get married at all, right? We're talking about the changing roles of women. So women are moving from 1950 to 2019 from the happy housewife to the, CEO of major companies or corporations. And that's how you might explain this particular process. Okay, explain how maps, images, landscapes illustrate or relate to geographic principles or processes. I like this one actually. So this says, explain how patterns of food production and consumption have been influenced by movements relating to individual food choice, right? This is an ag question. So this is obviously a farmer's market. It's a buy local. I mean, this dude's t-shirt even looks like he's like, buy local, vegetables grown close by, right? So the food production and consumption, so what is the movement relating to individual food choice? So you'd have to talk about what the movement is. And this is like a local food movement, farmers market, like the movement itself is buy local. And then getting that in there. And so, like, how does that influence food production, consumption? Well, more people are going to these local farmers markets because of these movements. And so that's really influencing people's desire to eat healthy, to move away from those multinational corporations that are like the five big ones that are controlling all of our food choices. And people are trying to make choices that are healthier. And that's a really big shift, especially in American culture, where you have just people wanting to eat healthier and wanting to support local farmers. And maybe this is happening because, again, because people are more interested in reducing climate change or doing their part uh, doing their part to reduce their carbon footprint, or however you want to explain it. I mean, just rambling right now. You guys don't ramble either. Like, have some ideas. This is why it's good to take a couple minutes before you start writing and just jot down like your ideas. You don't want to sound like me on paper. All right, 3F, explain the possible limitations of data provided. We haven't seen something like this before, so this one is important. This is the challenging explain, right? This is like the explain the degree in which something is or is not true. And so when you're looking at this is asking you to think about not only what data is included, but what data isn't included. So we talked about this map, this share of agricultural landowners who are female. But I just looked at the map for that first one. Now, if you look down, I'm not going to move my cursor, but if you look at the bottom of the map where it says note that due to poor data availability, the years of measurements vary between countries. So in some cases, we're getting the 2010, 2011 data, and sometimes we're getting data from 1993. So how accurate can a map be when and you look at the map, there's a ton of countries that don't have any data whatsoever because of a lack of availability. But in some cases, the data could be as old. I mean, all of this map is dated, right? Like lots of things have changed even since 2010. 10 years is a long time to think about levels of development. I mean, we have like a whole new set of like emerging economies just this past year, those mint countries. So the limitations of the data is the age in which the data is being presented might not accurately represent the true statistics that are today. Not to mention the fact that like many countries in the world don't even report this data. So how can we get an sort of really understand this these characteristics on a global scale? And then for again another map, so some limitations of visual sources. This one I like. This one's like really, it should be pretty simple. Here's two possible limitations. Um, I'll give you one and then I'll let you think about the other one. So one that comes to mind very quickly, well, I'll give you two. So like one thing that it doesn't tell you is like the scale, right? Like, so yes, we're a Christian country. Okay. But like how much? What branch? It doesn't really give you a ton of information, right? Are you Protestant? Are we Catholic? It just kind of lumps all of Christianity together. And then not only that, but when you look at it, this is a believe it or not, it's a chloropleth map where you're seeing evidence of like different shades on the map itself, but there's no like like, where's the key to illustrate the number of people who are actually practicing that particular religion? I mean, just look here on our, like, in North America, Mexico compared to the United States compared to Canada. We're all Christian, but varying degrees of Christian. And what does that even mean? So, again, like when you look at a map like this, sure, we can get information from it. We can see that the vast majority of the world are Christian, right? But like, we can't see to what degree each country is Christian. We can't see to what degree or what branch, even Islamic. Like, are we talking Sunni? Are we talking Shia? There's no differentiation there, and so you can kind of see where some of the issues are. So this is the second to last skills video that I'm going to do. So there's one more. I hope you guys are watching these. I feel like they're really valuable. And yeah, I guess that's all I have. So I hope you guys have a good day whenever you watch this. Bye.